Today's video was brought to you by Incogni. Ever since Nicola Sturgeon resigned, the SNP has been thrown into chaos. The party has lost its election-winning leader, its reputation has been tarnished by a lengthy investigation into alleged fraud committed by those at the top of the party, and its prospects at the next general election look dire. Unfortunately for the SNP though, things are only starting to look worse for them, with their power-sharing agreement with the Scottish Green Party falling apart earlier this week. And Humza Yousaf is now facing a vote of no confidence as First Minister. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the background of Yousaf's week from hell, what actually happened this week, and whether the Scottish Government could fall apart and fresh elections be called. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, the chaos this week started when Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf announced on Thursday that he would be ending the power-sharing agreement that his party has with the Greens. Now, to understand why he did this, we should start by going back to 2021 and understanding how and why his predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon, entered into the agreement in the first place. Essentially, Sturgeon failed to reach a majority in the May 2021 Scottish parliamentary elections, winning only 64 seats in the 129-seat parliament. This left them a single seat short of a majority. Initially, Sturgeon agreed to lead a minority government, but later that year in August, Sturgeon announced that she'd come to an agreement with the Greens in what's become known as the Butte House Agreement. While this was short of a full-blown coalition, it did guarantee Sturgeon support from all 8 MSPs on a number of policy areas. Specifically, it outlines that both parties agree on everything from the Constitution, both parties support Scottish independence, to climate change. And on these topics, the Greens were expected to toe the collective party line. The agreement did, however, outline a number of areas in which the two parties disagreed. This included everything from the legalisation of sex work, which the Greens wanted to decriminalise, to NATO membership, which the Greens opposed. On these matters, the Greens were able to vote against the government without being sanctioned or the agreement falling apart. For their cooperation, the Greens were given 2 ministers in cabinet, for which the Greens appointed Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater, the 2 co-leaders of the party, to these positions. With the agreement in place, some might have thought that the hard bit was done, and that the two parties could simply move ahead with governing. And to an extent, this did happen. The two parties initially worked well together, with the Greens' policy of free bus travel for anyone under 22 being introduced in January 2022 with the support of the SNP. But towards the end of 2022, cracks were already beginning to show. Cracks which resulted in 2 major breakdowns on policy. The first of these major policy breakdowns was on the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. Now, while the leadership of the SNP was nominally in favour, some notable figures within the party voted and spoke out against it. And this was a problem, as it was a policy that the Greens endorsed and explicitly mentioned within the Butte House Agreement. Although the bill was ultimately blocked by the Westminster government, something which we actually made a video about back when it happened, this was one of the first big moments that galvanised support within the SNP ranks against the Butte House Agreement. In fact, when Nicola Sturgeon resigned as leader in February 2023, Humza Yousaf was the only candidate in the leadership race which continued to back the Butte House Agreement. It's actually worth noting here that following the leadership election, Ash Reagan, one of the candidates who was critical of the agreement, actually defected from the SNP to the newly formed Alba Party, something that's become relevant once again this week, but more on that later. Anyway, fast forward to April 2024, and we see the second major policy disagreement between the SNP and the Scottish Greens, this time over climate targets. That's because Scotland has missed 8 out of its 12 targets for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. In a review of Scotland's journey to net zero emissions by 2045, the Climate Change Committee, or CCC, stated that the plan to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030 was unreachable. As such, the SNP decided to scrap the target, while stressing that they were still committed to achieving net zero by 2045. Understandably, given their political position on the environment, the Greens weren't terribly pleased about this, with co-leader Lorna Slater saying that Humza Yousaf had sold out future generations. It also added the impression among the Greens that the Butte House agreement was no longer working, and that something had to change. Now, it's easy to see this recent disagreement as being entirely focused around the SNP's decision on the 2030 target. But it's worth mentioning that the SNP and Greens have had some other substantial policy disagreements recently. In the last couple of months, the Greens have also disagreed with the SNP's decision to freeze local authorities' council tax rates, and with the decision by the SNP, in the wake of the CAS report, to pause the prescription of puberty blockers to children in the Scottish NHS. Anyway, given all of these mounting disagreements, it became clear that the Butte House agreement might be about to reach its conclusion. In fact, members of the Green Party were successful in pushing for a vote on whether to continue with the Butte House agreement at all, with this vote set to take place next month. Presumably sensing that this probably wouldn't end up going well for him, in a speech at 8:30 on Thursday morning, First Minister Humza Yousaf appeared to jump before he was pushed, announcing that he would be ending the Butte House agreement and would lead Scotland in a minority government. In response to this, the Scottish Conservatives pounced on the opportunity, and later in the day on Thursday announced that they will be formally moving a motion of no confidence in Humza Yousaf as First Minister. Now, as things stand, the SNP has 63 seats in the Scottish Parliament, while opposition MSPs have 65. Of those, the Greens have already stated that they will vote with other opposition parties to bring Yousaf down, meaning that if he wants to remain in the top job, the First Minister will need to look elsewhere for support. And, well, the only person he could realistically turn to was his old leadership rival and former SNP MSP, Ash Regan. If she decides to vote with her own party, then the no-confidence vote will be tied 64-64, giving the Speaker the casting vote. Now, by convention, the Speaker always votes with the status quo, meaning that in this situation, Yousaf would remain leader, albeit a significantly weakened one. However, if Reagan decides to vote with the opposition, then Yousaf would have to resign as First Minister, and the Scottish Parliament would have 28 days to try and find his successor. And if they fail at this, then fresh Scottish parliamentary elections would be called. It seems then that the whole future of Yousaf's leadership, and indeed the SNP's future in government, rests on whether Reagan backs Yousaf in the vote next week. While you've been watching this video, you might not have realised that shady forces in the background are trying to collect your personal data from various sites, bundle it together, and sell it to a third party. These data brokers can then sell your information to anyone, from a company to an online criminal. Now, you might assume that you're always safe online. Perhaps you regularly change your password, or even unsubscribe from those annoying email newsletters that you never even remember signing up for. But unfortunately, this doesn't always save you. Companies that hold your data can still fall victim to a data breach, meaning that these data brokers can still compile all of your information and sell it on to others. The good news is that you have a right to protect your privacy and request that data brokers delete your personal information. But the bad news is that it would take you years to do it manually. And even then, you'd need to repeat this process every few months as data brokers continue collecting your data. Luckily though, this is where our sponsor Incogni comes in. Incogni reaches out to those data brokers on your behalf, requests that your data is removed, and deals with any problems that might arise. Even more, Incogni is persistent and will put in multiple data removal requests even after your data has been removed to ensure that it doesn't go back on the market. So create an account with our link in the description, grant Incogni the ability to work on your behalf, and sit back as they make you safer. Plus, if you use our link, you'll get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Thanks for checking it out, and thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video.